I know there are many of you in here that work on this issue on a daily basis. Thank you, thank you, thank you. For those of you who have joined someone this evening and are curious, I hope you learn a great deal tonight, and I hope you join this effort with us to stop this, to save these children, and to stop the ability to sell a child online easier than to sell a motorcycle or a sofa, because that's what this is about. They're sold like a bag of rice. So most importantly, if I may, to the victims that are in the room, and I know that there are a few here tonight, please know that we have your back. I am sorry for the inability to have had this happen to anybody this has happened to, but more importantly, we want you to know what an inspiration you are to the rest of us.
Welcome, the force behind this really amazing film, I Am Jane Doe. The writer, producer, and director, Mary Mazzio. Mary, congratulations. And Mary, I have to ask you, I've got to start with you, because documentaries are true labors of love, and these labors don't take 9 months. These labors last a really long time. And of all the topics, the important topics that are out there, why did this one speak to you, and did you feel you needed to tell the story?
So I read an article in the Boston Globe. John Montgomery, where are you? Raise your hand. I read about Jane Doe number 1, Jane Doe number 2, and Jane Doe number 3 in Boston that had filed suit against Backpage.com, formerly owned by the Village Voice. And I remember thinking 3 things at the time. One, this happened 15 minutes away from where I lived. Child sex trafficking, what is that? And I was embarrassed by how little I knew about this crime. And when I discovered the breadth and scope of numbers, I was shocked that A, I didn't know, and that the numbers were so large. I had thought every once in a while you see a kid or you hear about a child that's at the Port Authority, and I thought, oh, sometimes that happens to a child every once in a while. It is not every once in a while. As you know from the film, 15%, and there's real consensus on this, that 15% of all homeless and runaway children are victimized for, child sex trafficking. We are talking about 1.6 to 2.5 million children on the street at one time. That's hundreds of thousands of children. So I remember thinking, how is this happening? It's 15 minutes from where I live, and the Village Voice? The Village Voice, this was a company that spoke truth to power. These were the guys that went after corrupt politicians, that went after big business that was doing malfeasance. How did they transform into what became the largest online commercial destination for sex, including sex trafficking of children? And that really was why, that sort of captured my attention. But the biggest thing was that Ropes and Gray had filed this case, and then Judge Richard Stearns in Boston ruled against them. The Jane Doe children lost. And I remember thinking to myself, how is it possibly legal in the United States of America that it is legal to host advertisements for the sale of children? As a former recovering and irritating lawyer, I was like, oh, okay, this cannot be possible. So I called up John Montgomery and I said, John, what are you doing here? And then he said, well, who are you? And that's pretty much how it started.
It's incredible because when you talk to people about it, they'll look at you and they'll say, oh, but that doesn't happen in this country. And that's the incredible thing. We're so quick to point a finger elsewhere, and yet it's happening right here in our own backyards. Senator McCain, let me ask you, because what we learn in the film is the legal process fails us and fails these children. And you allude to a legislative response, actually changing the law. Talk to us about that process and where you are with that.
Well, first of all, could I just give credit to Rob Portman and Claire McCaskill, who are the 2 leading members of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. Basically, that committee can do anything it wants to. look into any issue, look into anything that they think deserves to be investigated, and yet these two decided to go into this issue. And they spent weeks and months and didn't give up. And everybody talks about how polarized Congress is. I don't like Claire either, but the fact is to see these two working together in a bipartisan fashion on a cause such as this is really uplifting to all of us who have had the honor of knowing the weeks, literally, and hours that they spent on this very compelling issue. And Heidi and Cindy have worked together so well and so long. I'm a little embarrassed to say, mainly a bystander as compared with the great work that they have done. Frankly, I would like to work with Claire and with my friend on my left here, and for us to initiate that legislation that's necessary. They're the experts now. Rob has spent so much time, and so has Claire. They know what to do. I'm eager to play as strong a supporting role as I can.
So Senator McCaskill, let me let you pick that up, because there it is. Legislative action has to happen, needs to take place. Walk us through what happens. And to Senator McCain's point, at a time where partisanship seems to rule, can you break through that on an issue like this?
Well, I think we have two issues here. One is, how do you hold bad actors like Backpage accountable without damaging the ability of the internet to operate in an unfettered fashion under the First Amendment? And I would certainly, I spent a lot of time in the courtroom as the sex crimes prosecutor, and so my heart, it was very easy for me to be all in on this. But the lawyers that are out there, I mean, the problem that they had was they couldn't get past the motions to get all the information they needed to prove the culpability of Backpage. That's why the staff work, and I know Rob will agree with me on this, the staff, we got over 1 million pages of documents dumped on us. I think in the civil world, it's called literally a document dump, where they think if they give you so much at once, you'll never find the stuff. And the staff worked endless hours going through all these documents and found the evidence of their culpability, of molding these ads, of actually help write these ads, of them destroying the original ads that would show that these were ads for children, so they were cutting off a conduit for law enforcement to hold the pimps accountable. So we were able, through our investigation, to get the evidence. The question is, how can we amend the law so that any lawyer can get the evidence without damaging the ability of the First Amendment to protect honest players on the internet? And I think that's what Rob and I have talked about, because if you could have gotten past the motion practice to get to the discovery phase, you would have found what we found. And by the way, I know I'm speaking for Rob here. Rob is the chairman, and you threw it to me first, by the way, not good protocol. John got to talk first, so, but I will say this. I know all of our documents are, we want to work with everyone to make sure everybody gets what we got, so that all these lawsuits can move forward across the country in a way that will actually find justice.
Sorry for breaking protocol.
That's okay. I was teasing you.
I'm from New York. I don't know about these things. Senator Portman, let me ask you, how long have you been working now on this issue?
First of all, Claire breaks protocol every day. And to McCain here, John gives us a lot of credibility. Let's be honest. And when we went to the floor of the United States Senate and said, yeah, for the first time in 20 years, we'd like you to actually, file this civil lawsuit against this private company, the fact that John was willing to go to the floor and say, yeah, this is actually the right thing to do, to be honest, helped me a lot in terms of getting people to understand what this is about. But we've been at this for 2 years with regard to Backpage. I'll make another point, though, which is I do think there is a rare outbreak of not just bipartisanship, but nonpartisanship on this issue. About 6 years ago, we started a caucus in the Senate. And so, caucuses are all over the place. There's a caucus for, fish and a caucus for, the Army and so on. But this is a caucus that focuses on human trafficking. And it started off just 2 people. I co-founded it with a Democrat. Now I think we have 25 members of that caucus. And I'm talking like once a month having meetings and briefings and so on. And all these members you see here are actively involved. And through that, we've actually enacted 4, you could say 5 pieces of legislation just in the last 4 years that focus on trafficking. Increasing the penalties, for instance, for those who engage in the Johns, which many of you were involved with. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has been incredibly helpful. Polaris, others. First time in 15 years we increased those penalties as an example. But also just changing the dynamic where, for years, these women and girls have been treated like criminals. And under the federal law, we've actually changed that standard to treat them like victims, which means that they can be able to get some of the incredibly important recovery services they need to deal with the trauma that we heard about tonight and that is so obvious in this horrible crime. And that's huge. And then we also, with regard to the National Center, worked with them to ensure that local law enforcement all around the country now have to post a photograph of a child who goes missing, which seems really obvious, right? In Ohio, about 30% of the kids had photos until now. And they had dental records. But, you go to a homeless shelter and say, I'm looking for this kid. Well, where's the photograph? We don't have one. And these kids obviously are some of the most vulnerable, as we heard tonight. So my point would be, Perry, that this is a really important investigation, and over a 2-year period and 1 million documents. And some of the lawyers are here, and I'm asking to stand up in a second from both their staff and my staff. But we were able to, as I said in the film, pull back the curtain and show that they were actually concealing criminality, knowingly concealing it, which will now help in terms of many of these lawsuits around the country. So this is a big deal. And the next documentary that Mary's going to do, she's doing an awesome job with this. I hope the next one won't be, denied, because now, at least with regard to the activities that we saw on that film, when you look back and see that they were actually covering up evidence of criminality knowingly, that from a legal point of view will help in terms of these cases. I think there were 4 cases filed week before last, as I understand it. So we have a legislative function, but there's also now this opportunity to hold people to account. And I think that's incredibly important. If the lawyers could stand up, I see 4 of you back there. Let's stand up, the lawyers who spent 2 years and 1 million documents and all the work.
One follow-up question to what you were just saying is, we've just watched the film for an hour and a half. You've been working on this now for several years. Is it incredibly frustrating to have followed this for these 2 years, to see these dead ends keep happening?
With regard to Backpage, incredibly frustrating. But again, I don't want to leave tonight without a bit of hope and optimism, which is that on again, I said, nonpartisan basis, I think America is becoming more conscious and aware. One thing I hear a lot from victims of trafficking back home, and Claire and I and John and Heidi and all of us are now talking to a lot of people back home about their experiences. And what they say, almost to a person, is Backpage and drugs. And the drug issue we haven't gotten into tonight, and this is an incredibly important part of what's happening that's caused this explosion. And we also hear the iPhone is now the way in which we are sold, so it's gone from the street corner to the iPhone. So that's the danger, and the explosion of this is real, but there's also a lot more consciousness and awareness, and so that's the positive part. The Backpage part, yeah, incredibly frustrating. And
it's really frustrating as a viewer to watch.
Yeah. The most frustrating of all is to hear a mother say, I saw my daughter on Backpage, and I called them, and they refused to take her photograph down. I mean, that's not the country that we love, right? I see my daughter, she's been missing for weeks. She's on Backpage. I called them thinking they're going to say, oh, I'm so sorry. Instead they say, did you pay for the ad? Right? If you didn't pay for the ad, we can't take it down. I mean, to me, that was just the emotions that run through all of us. We've got to shut this thing down. And again, as Claire rightly said, the night before the hearing, they actually shut down their adult section. But then, if you look at some other sections of the same website, you see an increase in activity. And also, you're going to see other websites crop up. So the solution is not just to win these lawsuits against Backpage. It has to be a much broader effort.
Absolutely. Senator Heitkamp, I'm curious, we tend to think of this as a problem restricted to Los Angeles, New York, DC. That's not the case. Talk to us about what you're dealing with.
Well, my involvement in this was, I was a former attorney general running for the Senate, went out and started visiting with all of my pals in law enforcement. They started talking about this incredible explosion of prostitution. And they just didn't have time to investigate it. They just, because we were in the middle of a big oil boom, and all of a sudden something was happening in North Dakota that had never happened before. And so I got to thinking about what does this mean, and it seems like we've got to have an answer to this. And then you start researching and you start reading and you start realizing this could be some of the most horrific crime that is occurring in our state. And you start educating. And I just tell you a story, town of Dickinson, North Dakota. It's, well, who knows what it is because all of this has exploded, but it's no more than 30,000 people. A Bureau of Criminal Investigation comes in to do a sting, and they advertised, literally made it very clear that it was a 14-year-old. They had to shut it down after an hour and a half because there wasn't enough prison space. There wasn't enough space in jail. And they got 2 calls asking for a 12-year-old. So when you say that in a community of North Dakota, you get the reaction, I didn't think this happens in my state. And you know that the target of the victim is many times someone who lives in poverty, someone who struggles, that you aren't, that I like to say it's not so easy when you're looking at this directly in the face to see any sympathy for what happened. If you think, you guys did not get the sense, because when we were in the hearing, how smug they were. How absolutely smug and untouchable they were. And I think it only further solidified.
And didn't they look good in that?
Yeah, that jumpsuit,
Yeah.
The point that I want to make, though, is that this is a case about access to justice, about a system that gives access to justice. But the bigger problem is, how do we prevent it? And Backpages is just one part of this, just one part. It's like whack-a-mole. You take down Backpages, somebody else is going to be there. Because there's a buck to be made, and people can't be shamed to not do it.
It is like whack-a-mole. It's exactly right. Okay, Mary, to Senator Portman's point, we want to end on a positive note. People have just seen the film. What can each and every one of us do to try to make a difference? And if one of the things that makes documentary get out there, we need to spread the word. How can people help do that?
So a couple of ways. We are donating 50 cents on every dollar of profit on this project. We just inked a deal with Netflix that will happen later in the year. 50 cents on all of those dollars. Please tell everybody you know about the film. We open in theaters, in multiplexes, in 6 cities, including Washington, D.C. Go to IamJaneDoeFilm.com. Please tell everybody you know. We just got reviewed in Esquire. Like, this is a huge deal. Like, Esquire, Ellen, where are you? And they loved it. And so if Esquire loves it, we hope we know you guys did, but please tell everybody. The second thing is, call your congressman. Because they're not busy right now. Seriously.
He can get through.
And my sort of vantage point, now I've been steeped in this issue for so long, but responsibility for online harm, it's coming. Why is it that a fully mature industry in cyberspace is somehow still exempt from having to defend third-party content. When the New York Times, the Washington Post, they have to show up with their battery of lawyers for third-party content. The time has come, and this is going to send shivers, I'm sure, down Senator McCaskill's back, but I think even content neutral sites, trafficking is happening on those sites as well. What more can they do? And that's what these children really are asking. What more can these companies do? So please tell everybody you know, hashtag I am Jane Doe, and thank you so much for coming to join us tonight.
To thank the senators for being here, Senator McCain, Senator Portman, Senator McCaskill, Senator Heitkamp, thank you so much, and thank you for your work on this topic. Mary Mazzio, congratulations again. As a fellow filmmaker, these aren't easy, you've done an extraordinary job.